So, Curt, thank you for being here with us today.
Sure.
Would you mind just sharing with us a little bit about yourself, just where you come from and your background, things like that?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. Typical suburban family. Um, my dad died when I was 9. I think that was probably the most impactful part of my growing up. And that did change some things. Obviously, my mom did remarry. It wasn't too long. It was a couple, 3 years after my dad had passed that she remarried. So it wasn't like I never had the father figure in the house. It was just a very abrupt change. And so we did end up I was raised originally in a Methodist church, and then that's actually where my mom met my stepfather, was there. But then we transferred to a Baptist church, and very conservative, traditional Baptist church. And so then, I think that definitely shaped, some of what I was exposed to again. And I don't really think, once I hit college and moved out on my own, that I ever really gave anything much thought about my education and what I've been exposed to from the world and what was happening around me. I would probably call myself ignorant, from the standpoint that I made ignorant comments. If I look back on it historically now, things that I said out of just not knowing and not being educated. And I think that really lasted a good part of my life, if I'm really honest. I don't think I really started to see the difference in the world probably into the last 10 years. That I think started, Kim obviously being in my life for 25 years, or longer, I guess. I don't know, we went to college together. But anyway, there was exposure to that different mindset and different experiences that she had, I think started to kind of resonate with me a little bit. And then I started asking myself questions and started to wonder a little bit more about what I really hadn't been exposed to. And I'll say that really in the last 5 years, the company I work for has opened my eyes tremendously. I'm in the hospitality industry, been in the hospitality industry my entire career, which lends itself to service and being, hospitable to people. And one of the things that we didn't really I never really attached to the hospitality industry that we focus a lot on in my current role is unconscious bias and how that impacts how you serve people. And that you have these certain implicit biases that come up in your interactions with people on a daily basis, and you're making decisions without realizing you're making decisions. And so the company I work for now has spent a lot of time educating its leadership on the impacts of that, how it can impact that, but also has formed a diversity and inclusion group that it's provided me training, it's provided me resources. We've got, our chief legal counsel has started a nonprofit organization that focuses on race and policing and policing in local communities, and it's been incredibly eye-opening. So I really say that the transformation has been mostly in the last 5 years, and kind of the exposure to that, and really understanding how much I didn't know. I think, now I find myself challenging myself more, and realizing how uncomfortable I have to get in order to really become more educated. And I think that's where I've spent my time, is exposing myself to things that are just not something I would have exposed myself prior to, just to become more uncomfortable in my own skin. And thinking back, and that's really what's highlighted to me, I think, how uneducated I was growing up and how disconnected I was from these things growing up, is that, I look back on decisions I made, things I said, things I did that just were not okay. Can't do anything to change that now, but I can certainly, look at my growth and try to help, either my mom that's still around today or stepdad, other people that I know influence the way I probably behaved and how I was educated in the past, and help them become educated, and challenge them in things that I hear them say.
So, if you don't mind, would you mind sharing a story? Because I feel like I heard at least one, but sharing a story in which you feel like, okay, this is a very clear moment in which Curt did not know better.
Yes. So I would focus on an experience in high school. So in Houston, I went to Westbury High School in Houston, Texas. Our mascot was Johnny Rebel. So, and there was a huge effort at the time to change that. Obviously the black students kind of rose up and They were obviously the majority. I think they were the majority of the school. And there was a particular day in which they kind of chose to protest, and they all wore Malcolm X T-shirts that said "by any means necessary." My view, the only thing I knew about Malcolm X was the violent side and what I'd heard and probably seen. And so when I saw these shirts come up, I wrote a letter to our principal, just kind of expressing my viewpoint that if we couldn't have the rebel flag as a representation, then they shouldn't be able to wear these shirts. It's kind of that was the mindset that I came at it with. And really felt, my parents read the letter. I wrote it. Parents read it. I had multiple people look at it. Didn't think anything about it, and submitted it, and was called to the principal's office the next day, thinking, okay, good, we're going to have a conversation. Things are going to go well. That is not what happened. I was accused of being a member of the KKK, and that I was trying to. One of the lines in the letter said there was other people at the school that feel this way. And that was the line that apparently drew her attention to having me investigated. So I look back on that now and think how dumb I was to not talk to these students that were upset and protesting and try to understand why. I just went at it from what I knew and didn't. And I think if I were to learn anything about my past, it would always be to go and ask the people that I don't agree with. If I'm not agreeing with something, figure out why, because I think had I had conversations with a few of these students, I certainly would have probably had a different outlook on it. I certainly have a different outlook on it today from that standpoint. But yeah, I think that was probably the biggest one that I can say is stuck with me.
So how much of that, I heard you mention that a conversation may have been helpful. How much does relationship play a role in helping us see things differently?
Well, I think it's huge. I think, relationship to me is, it's not all about agreeing. It's not all about, finding somebody that is 100% in your path. I think if you can find relationship with people that have different backgrounds, different experiences, it is how you become a better person. It exposes you to more. And I think that's part of where my challenges growing up was I was not exposed to more. I wasn't, the only exposure that I probably had was at school, to anything that was different than what was in the four walls of my house. And so if I can, find relationship with others that have a different background or a different experience, all it does is help me grow and learn.
So you mentioned that part of being married, being married to your wife is like helped you begin to probably, get a little uncomfortable with some things and re-examine some things. But you mentioned like probably in the last 10 years or so, you've kind of had this like, okay, I don't know if you would call it a 180, but just something shifted.
Yes.
Is there anything particular that happened?
I think what I saw during the Obama administration, I think the first 4 years I was probably still kind of not really paying attention to how big of a moment that was. But in the next 4, as I heard more of my family and what the things that they were saying about the president and what I was hearing, I think it started to shift that here's this guy, every president we've ever had, nobody's ever, they're successful. They're there for a reason. They've grown to prominence. But that was not the impression that people had that I was around. And I really started to question why that was. Why would we disparage this person who's worked extremely hard to get where he's at, and probably harder than a lot. I think that was really where the privilege kind of thing started to come into play for me more, was, not only did he have to work, he worked probably 10 times harder than anybody else did to get to that position. And I really started to question why the things were being said that were being said. And I think as we evolved into the next administration and just the continuation of that, really started to open my eyes to how, and quite frankly, just people that I was still, not just family, but friends and people that I thought I knew, and saying things that they were saying. And I'm just like, I can't compute with that anymore. That doesn't make sense to me anymore. And even made me challenge it more, and really started asking more questions.
So as you kind of had this realization, okay, well, this feels off, right? How did you filter that through your faith?
It played a huge role because I think, again, kind of having the different experiences growing up, and then going back occasionally, if I visit my parents, we go to the Baptist church that they're still attending now, and just hearing the difference in messaging between, what I'm hearing on a normal basis and what I hear when I'm visiting there. I can tell where some of that, if you're not questioning or challenging your faith in those same ways, that you're not helping yourself. If you're just listening, and that's what I feel like is happening there, is it's just kind of being spoken to and not in a conversation. And I think for me, having a conversation about faith is what has also helped with not just the Black community, but the immigration crisis, all these things that, the love your neighbor concept, and really digging in and understanding what that means, and how often it gets misused or not used at all, and just it flat out ignored in the faith community is, it's disheartening, but it's good to be in a community where I feel like that's not the case. And it helps me to be able to have those conversations with others when I hear things now that are not in line with what my faith is and what I believe the greater good would be.
So here your family is, right? You said you grew up, you had some experience in the Methodist church, experience in the Baptist church. You have the experiences with race, but one of the things I think that Grace Chapel particularly stands on, and Grace Avenue at large stands on, is the sort of like open and affirming nature of our church toward the queer community in particular. How's that been for you?
Yeah, so that's actually, you mentioned that, it's something that I had thought about when I was thinking through the questions earlier, because I do think that there was a moment in time in my youth where I went, there was a reaction. My brother's gay, and when he called me to come out when it was right around the time I graduated high school. He's 5 years older than me. No, I guess it was in college. So yeah, it was a little bit later. But anyway, he called to come out, and it didn't faze me at all. You're my brother, still gonna love you. It doesn't matter to me. It resonated with me that I knew growing up, he felt picked on and bullied. He was called names occasionally that, slurs that nobody knew at the time, or he didn't probably even know at the time, that he had struggling with something, but probably didn't know what that was. But that, being called these slurs, I think I remember very clearly him getting very upset about it.
Okay. And so you kind of just like, that's your brother, you love him, right? But I think, like you're saying, there some people filter that love for other through like this lens of sin, right? But this church doesn't claim that. How are those conversations for you, right? So like, it's like, even if you love your brother, did you still feel like okay, maybe this is still wrong, but I love him enough to kind of just like act like it?
I never even thought anything different, other than this is who he is, and cool. It wasn't a thing for me, and I think that probably is a section at our point, a turning point that I could kind of say that I really realized that there was a difference in my beliefs, and then those around me. I think a church that's completely affirming and inclusive is just incredibly important for any community that faces any kind of discrimination, but particularly that community, I think, has been particularly targeted by the church and some of the hateful things that have been said in the church. And when anybody that's going through that, I know, just thinking about my brother and probably the struggles that he went through, had he felt like he had a community where he could go and be loved and embraced, would have probably made a lot of difference in his life and some of the things that he's gone on before or after, because you just don't feel like you're included. And if you feel you can be included, your voice matters, and people are hearing you for who you are and helping you work through whatever the potential, emotional or what's the word I'm looking for? Just the overall, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm totally lost here. Anxiety, just the mental effects that it has on you, because you think that people don't include you. And I think if you can be in an environment where that changes that mindset and that space, it's what they need. It's they need that affirmation.
Thank you, Curt, for
Sure.
your time. Greatly
Yeah.
appreciate it.
You bet, anytime.